Some women fall for doctors, others for lawyers or CEOs. But Riley Parker, the most dedicated nurse in St. Mary's Hospital, never imagined she'd fall for a patient who walked in bleeding, mysterious, and absolutely forbidden. She definitely never imagined he'd turn out to be the most dangerous man in the city, or that loving him would be worth risking everything she'd ever believed about right and wrong.
Welcome to another episode of Ever After Romance Audiobook. This story is an original creation for entertainment only.
Chapter 1. Riley's Breaking Point. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Emergency Department buzzed with the same relentless intensity that had been grinding Riley Parker's soul to dust for the past 18 months. 3 a.m. on a Thursday meant the dregs of humanity stumbled through those automatic doors. Overdoses, domestic violence cases, and the occasional gunshot wound that made her question why she'd ever believed medicine was about healing rather than damage control. Riley's scrubs, once pristine navy blue, now bore the abstract artwork of 12-hour shifts, coffee stains mapping her exhaustion, mysterious spots that could be anything from blood to antiseptic, and the general wrinkled defeat of someone who'd forgotten what sleep felt like. Her dark hair, pulled back in what had started as a professional bun, now resembled something a hurricane might have crafted. Nevertheless, it was her eyes that told the real story. Brown depths that had once sparkled with the idealistic fire of someone who believed she could make a difference, now dulled to the color of burnt coffee and broken dreams. "Parker!" Dr. Morrison's voice cut through the ambient chaos like a scalpel through skin, sharp and demanding. "Room 3 needs sutures. Room 7 is asking for pain meds again, and we've got an incoming trauma in 5 minutes. Riley's hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory carrying her through tasks that had once required conscious thought. Sutures applied with mechanical precision, pain medication administered with professional detachment, vital signs recorded without a flicker of the compassion that had once defined her calling. The trauma that arrived wasn't anything special by St. Mary's standards. Construction accident, possible internal bleeding, conscious but disoriented. Just another broken body in an endless parade of human wreckage that the healthcare system chewed up and spit out with minimal care and maximum billing. "Time of death, 3:47 a.m., Dr. Morrison announced 20 minutes later, his voice carrying the same emotional weight as a grocery list. Riley stood frozen beside the now silent gurney, watching as orderlies covered the face of a man who'd been breathing, hoping, fighting just moments before. Michael Rodriguez, age 28, father of 2, construction worker who'd been working double shifts to pay for his daughter's medical treatments. She'd seen him 3 times in the past month, exhaustion-related injuries that management had dismissed as drug-seeking behavior despite Riley's protests. Now Michael Rodriguez was dead because an understaffed, overworked emergency department couldn't provide adequate care to someone whose insurance didn't guarantee profit margins. Furthermore, Riley realized with crystalline clarity that she was becoming complicit in a system that valued billing codes over human lives. The break room offered no solace, just harsh lighting and the persistent smell of industrial disinfectant that had permanently embedded itself in Riley's nasal passages. She pulled out her laptop with trembling hands, opening the document she'd been updating for weeks, her resignation letter. "Dear Dr. Morrison, please accept this letter as formal notification of my resignation from my position as emergency department nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. My last day of employment will be..." The cursor blinked accusingly after "will be," waiting for Riley to choose a date that would end her medical career and transform her into just another office drone in a world that had plenty of those already. "You look like someone stole your favorite stethoscope," came a voice from the doorway. Riley looked up to find Marcus Chen, one of the few doctors who still seemed to remember that patients were people rather than profit centers. His kind eyes held the same exhaustion that plagued everyone who worked in healthcare, but underneath lay stubborn compassion that bureaucracy hadn't managed to kill. "Just updating my resume," Riley said with bitter honesty that surprised them both. "Apparently, corporate administration is more lucrative than actually saving lives." Marcus settled into the plastic chair across from her, his expression growing serious. "Riley, you're one of the best nurses I've ever worked with. Don't let this place destroy what you love about medicine. What if there's nothing left to love? Riley's question hung in the air like a confession, raw and painful in its honesty. Before Marcus could respond, the intercom crackled to life with urgent authority. All available medical personnel to the ER. Priority 1 incoming. VIP status. All available medical personnel to the ER immediately. Riley's finger hovered over the laptop's keyboard, caught between signing her resignation and answering one last call to duty. The choice felt symbolic, final, like standing at a crossroads where every path led away from the woman she'd once dreamed of becoming. "Come on," Marcus said gently, extending his hand. "One more patient. What's the worst that could happen?" As Riley closed her laptop and followed Marcus toward whatever emergency awaited, she had no idea that the worst that could happen would actually turn out to be the best thing that had ever happened to her, even if it came wrapped in danger, deception, and a love that would challenge everything she thought she knew about right and wrong. Chapter 2. The Mystery Patient. The private wing of St. Mary's Hospital existed in stark contrast to the chaos of the main emergency department, its hushed corridors and expensive artwork serving wealthy patients who could afford to buy their way out of the healthcare lottery that determined who lived and who died based on insurance coverage. Riley had worked in this section only a handful of times, each instance leaving her acutely aware of the inequality that permeated every aspect of American medicine. Tonight, however, the private wing buzzed with unusual activity that sent electricity through the normally sedate atmosphere. Men in expensive suits formed a human barrier around room 314, their posture radiating the kind of alert tension Riley recognized from action movies rather than medical facilities. These weren't typical family members or even hospital security. They moved with predatory precision that suggested familiarity with violence, their eyes constantly scanning for threats that had no business existing in a place dedicated to healing. "What's the story on our VIP?" Riley asked Dr. Ramirez, who was reviewing charts with the focused intensity of someone trying to solve a particularly complex puzzle. "John Doe," Dr. Ramirez replied with obvious frustration. "Gunshot wound to the shoulder, possible internal bleeding, but he's refusing to provide personal information. No insurance cards, no emergency contacts, just a very expensive watch and the kind of security detail that makes our administrator nervous." Riley's professional curiosity warred with exhaustion as she approached room 314, her steps slowing as she caught sight of the patient through the partially open door. Even from a distance, even pale and obviously in pain, the man commanded attention in ways that had nothing to do with his mysterious circumstances, and everything to do with raw masculine magnetism that seemed to radiate from his very pores. Dark hair fell across his forehead in waves that suggested expensive styling despite obvious neglect, while sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw created the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers rather than hospital gurneys. His eyes, when they briefly met hers through the doorway, were the color of storm clouds, gray depths that held intelligence, pain, and something else that made Riley's pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with professional concern. Furthermore, despite his obvious injury and vulnerable position, he carried himself with an authority that suggested he was accustomed to being in control, even when circumstances should have rendered him powerless. "Nurse Parker," Dr. Ramirez continued, unaware of Riley's sudden fascination with their mysterious patient, "I'm assigning you as primary nurse for Mr. Doe. He's been difficult with the other staff, but maybe a fresh face will encourage cooperation." Riley nodded, gathering her professional composure as she entered room 314, with the confident stride of someone who'd learned to project competence, even when her heart was hammering against her ribs for reasons she couldn't name. "Good evening, Mr. Doe," Riley said with careful politeness, her voice carrying the practiced warmth she used with patients who needed reassurance more than medical procedures. "I'm Riley, and I'll be taking care of you during your stay." The man's eyes opened fully for the first time, focusing on Riley with an intensity that made her suddenly conscious of every detail of her appearance, her tired scrubs, her hastily repinned hair, the way her pulse was racing despite her attempts at professional detachment. "Riley," he repeated, her name sounding different in his deep voice, richer somehow, like wine aged to perfection. No last name? How mysterious. Nurse Parker, Riley corrected automatically, though something about his slight smile suggested he'd extracted exactly the information he'd wanted. Adrian, he replied with elegant simplicity, offering his first name like a gift wrapped in expensive paper. And before you ask, no, I can't provide additional information about my identity. Let's just say I'm having a disagreement with some business associates who prefer more direct forms of negotiation. Riley felt her professional alarm bells ringing as she processed the implications of Adrian's carefully worded explanation. Gunshot wound, plus mysterious identity, plus obvious wealth, plus security detail, equaled trouble of the kind that could destroy careers and complicate lives in ways she definitely didn't need. Nevertheless, as she began checking his vital signs with gentle efficiency, Riley found herself drawn to the contradiction between Adrian's dangerous circumstances and his obvious vulnerability. His pulse was strong but elevated, his breathing careful in the way that suggested pain he was trying to hide. And when her fingers accidentally brushed his wrist while checking his IV line, she felt him flinch not from pain but from the simple human contact. "When did you last eat?" Riley asked, noting the slight tremor in his hands that suggested low blood sugar combined with blood loss. "Yesterday, maybe," Adrian admitted with the kind of casual disregard for self-care that made Riley's nursing instincts flare with protective concern. "I've been rather busy avoiding people who want to kill me." The matter-of-fact way he mentioned assassination attempts should have terrified Riley, should have sent her running toward the safety of routine patients with routine problems. Instead, she found herself leaning closer, studying his face for signs of deception or bravado. What she found instead was exhaustion that matched her own, loneliness that resonated with something deep in her chest, and eyes that held depths of pain that had nothing to do with bullet wounds and everything to do with wounds that couldn't be healed with sutures and antibiotics. "Well," Riley said with gentle firmness, her decision made before her rational mind could intervene, "whoever wants to kill you will have to wait. Right now, you're my patient, which means my job is to keep you alive and healing." Adrian's smile transformed his entire face, revealing dimples that made him look younger and infinitely more approachable. "Your job, Nurse Parker? And here I thought you might be doing it because you care." Before Riley could formulate a response that maintained professional boundaries while acknowledging the electricity crackling between them, Adrian's hand moved to cover hers where it rested on his chart. The contact was electric, sending awareness shooting through Riley's nervous system like lightning during a summer storm. "Thank you," Adrian said quietly, his voice rough with emotion that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. "It's been a long time since someone cared whether I lived or died for reasons that had nothing to do with money or power." As Riley looked into Adrian's storm-gray eyes, she realized that her resignation letter would have to wait. Something about this mysterious, dangerous, unexpectedly vulnerable man had awakened feelings she'd thought the healthcare system had killed forever. She was about to discover that some patients were worth risking everything for, including her heart. Chapter 3. Getting to Know You. Morning sunlight filtered through the expensive blinds of Adrian's private room, casting geometric patterns across the pristine walls that somehow made the space feel more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility. Riley had drawn the day shift by choice rather than assignment, her concern for Adrian's welfare overriding exhaustion and common sense in equal measure. 3 days of caring for Adrian had established a routine that felt both professional and intimate, checking vitals that remained stubbornly elevated whenever she was near, changing bandages with gentle efficiency that made Adrian's eyes darken with something that definitely wasn't pain, and engaging in conversations that danced around dangerous topics with practiced precision. "Your shoulder is healing remarkably well," Riley observed, as she examined the gunshot wound that was closing with the kind of speed that suggested excellent physical condition and possibly superior medical care prior to his arrival. "You must have a good doctor." "I have excellent everything," Adrian replied with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to wealth, though his smile softened the edge of privilege. Money has a way of solving most problems, even the kinds that involve bullets and bad decisions. Riley felt her eyebrows rise at his casual mention of bullet wounds as routine business expenses. Most people don't consider getting shot a minor inconvenience. Most people aren't in my line of work, Adrian said carefully, his gray eyes watching Riley's reaction with the intensity of someone gauging whether he'd revealed too much. Which is? Riley prompted, though part of her wondered if she really wanted to know the answer. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze shifting to the window where his security detail maintained their vigilant watch. "Technology consulting," he said finally, the lie rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "High-stakes corporate negotiations that sometimes become more personal than strictly professional." Riley nodded with the kind of polite acceptance that suggested she knew he was lying, but wasn't ready to push for truth that might complicate the growing attraction between them. Instead, she focused on adjusting his IV line with gentle precision that sent shivers of awareness through Adrian's battle-hardened nervous system. "What about you, Nurse Parker?" Adrian asked, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "What made you choose medicine? Besides the obvious appeal of caring for difficult patients with mysterious backgrounds?" Riley's laugh was soft but genuine, the first truly happy sound Adrian had heard her make. "I wanted to save people," she admitted with the kind of honesty that came easier in the intimacy of medical care. "Growing up, my little brother had asthma, and I watched my parents panic every time he couldn't breathe. I decided I wanted to be the person who could fix things when they went wrong. And now?" Adrian's question was gentle, recognizing the shadow that crossed Riley's features. "Now I'm not sure there's anything left to fix," Riley said with devastating honesty. "The system is broken. Patients die for financial reasons rather than medical ones, and I'm starting to think I'm just another cog in a machine that values profit over people." Adrian felt something crack open in his chest as he recognized the disillusionment in Riley's voice, the way idealism curdled into cynicism when reality proved uglier than dreams. He'd seen the same transformation in his own reflection years ago, when family obligations had forced him into a world where survival required abandoning moral absolutes. What if you could change that? Adrian asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of possibilities Riley couldn't yet imagine. What if you had unlimited resources to practice medicine the way it should be practiced? Riley's eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been hope. That's a beautiful fantasy, but medical school debt and rent payments live in the real world. Medical school debt? Adrian repeated thoughtfully, his brilliant mind already calculating ways to solve problems Riley considered insurmountable. "How much?" "Adrian, you don't have to—" "I'm not offering charity," Adrian interrupted with gentle firmness. "I'm asking hypothetical questions about what it would take to restore your faith in medicine." Before Riley could respond, the room's door opened with the kind of quiet authority that suggested important visitors. 3 men in expensive suits entered with synchronized precision, their movements suggesting familiarity with security protocols and possibly violence. "Mr. Steele," the lead man said with respectful deference that made Riley's blood run cold. "We need to discuss the Chicago situation." Adrian's entire demeanor shifted in the space of a heartbeat, transforming from vulnerable patient to commanding authority with an ease that spoke of long practice. "Marcus, I told you no business until I'm discharged." "This can't wait," Marcus replied with the kind of urgency that suggested life-or-death decisions. "The Kozlov family is making moves, and our sources say they've traced the hospital incident back to us." Riley felt the world tilt as she processed the implications of what she was hearing. Kozlov family. Hospital incident. The men in Adrian's room weren't corporate consultants. They were something far more dangerous, and Adrian wasn't a technology executive involved in aggressive business practices. "Riley," Adrian's voice cut through her realization with desperate gentleness, Could you give us a few minutes? I promise I'll explain everything later. Riley nodded numbly, her professional training warring with growing awareness that she'd stumbled into something far beyond her understanding. As she left the room, she caught fragments of conversation that made her pulse race with fear and fascination. Increased security detail. Eliminate the threat before. Protect what matters most. Standing in the hallway outside Adrian's room, Riley felt as though she were balanced on the edge of a cliff, faced with a choice between the safety of ignorance and the dangerous allure of a truth that would change everything she thought she knew about the mysterious man who'd somehow become the most interesting part of her day. Through the partially open door, she heard Adrian's voice, rougher now with authority and something that might have been menace. Anyone who threatens what's mine will discover exactly why the Steele family has controlled this territory for 3 generations. Riley's hand flew to her throat as understanding crashed over her like ice water. Adrian Steele. She'd heard that name whispered in hospital corridors, seen it in newspaper headlines about organized crime and federal investigations. Her patient, the man she was falling for despite every rational instinct, wasn't just mysterious. He was one of the most dangerous men in the city. And somehow, that knowledge only made her want him more. Chapter 4. The Temptation. The hospital's rooftop garden existed as an oasis of tranquility above the chaos of medical crises, its carefully tended plants and quiet benches offering respite for staff who needed to remember that life involved more than suffering and death. Riley had discovered this sanctuary during her first week at St. Mary's, and it had become her refuge during breaks when the weight of human misery threatened to crush what remained of her optimism. Today, however, she wasn't alone. Adrian sat on the stone bench near the herb garden, his expensive suit replaced by hospital-issued clothing that somehow managed to look tailored to his powerful frame. His shoulder was still bandaged, his movements careful, but there was something about his posture that suggested he was healing in more ways than just physical. "Nurse Parker," Adrian said without turning around, though his voice carried warmth that made Riley's name sound like an endearment. "I was hoping you'd find me here." "You shouldn't be out of bed," Riley said automatically, though her concern was tempered by the obvious improvement in his condition. Dr. Ramirez specifically said, "Dr. Ramirez doesn't understand that some healing requires more than medical intervention," Adrian interrupted gently, finally turning to face her with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her professional facade. "Sometimes a man needs fresh air and honest conversation more than IV drips and monitoring equipment." Riley felt her resolve wavering as she took in Adrian's appearance in natural lighting. The harsh hospital fluorescence had hidden details that sunlight revealed with devastating clarity, the way his dark hair caught golden highlights, the sharp intelligence in his features, the unconscious grace with which he moved despite his injury. Furthermore, there was something different about him outside the confines of his hospital room, something that suggested this was closer to his true self than the carefully controlled patient she'd been treating. "How did you know I'd come here?" Riley asked, settling onto the bench beside him with a careful distance that felt inadequate given the electricity crackling between them. "Lucky guess," Adrian replied with a smile that suggested nothing about their meeting was accidental. "You strike me as someone who needs beauty in her life, especially when work becomes overwhelming." Riley felt heat rise in her cheeks at the implication that Adrian had been observing her closely enough to understand her emotional needs. "You don't know anything about my work. I know you care too much for a system that doesn't care enough," Adrian said with surprising gentleness. "I know you're questioning whether the sacrifices you've made for medicine are worth the results you're seeing, and I know you're considering leaving healthcare altogether because you think there's no way to fix what's broken." The accuracy of his assessment took Riley's breath away, forcing her to confront how transparent her emotional struggle must be to someone who possessed Adrian's obvious intelligence and observation skills. "How could you possibly know all that?" Riley whispered. "Because I recognize the look in your eyes," Adrian said quietly, his gaze holding hers with intensity that made the garden around them fade into irrelevance. It's the same look I had when I realized that the world operates according to rules that have nothing to do with justice or fairness, and everything to do with power and money. And what did you do about it? Riley asked, though part of her suspected she wouldn't like the answer. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his expression growing distant, as if he were revisiting decisions that had shaped his life in ways he couldn't undo. I learned to play by those rules, he said finally. I discovered that if you can't change the game, you find ways to win it on your own terms. Even if those terms compromise everything you once believed in? Especially then, Adrian replied with bitter honesty. Because believing in ideals that the world doesn't share is a luxury that people like us can't afford. Riley felt something cold settle in her stomach as she processed the implications of Adrian's philosophy. People like us? People who started with noble intentions and discovered that nobility is a disadvantage in a world that rewards pragmatism over principles, Adrian clarified, his hand moving to cover hers on the bench between them. The contact was electric, sending awareness shooting through Riley's nervous system, even as her mind processed the dangerous territory their conversation was entering. Adrian's touch was gentle but possessive, warm but somehow predatory, like being caressed by a wolf who'd temporarily forgotten his nature. What if there was another way? Riley asked desperately, her voice barely audible above the city noise filtering up from the streets below. What if you could use power and money to fix the things that are broken instead of just profiting from them? Adrian's smile was soft but sad, carrying the weight of dreams he'd abandoned long ago. That's a beautiful thought, Riley. But changing systems requires more resources and ruthlessness than most people possess. Do you possess them? Riley heard herself asking, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. More than you could imagine, Adrian replied with quiet conviction. The question is whether you'd be willing to accept help from someone whose methods might not align with your moral code. Riley stared into Adrian's eyes, seeing depths of complexity that went far beyond simple criminal activity. Here was a man who'd obviously made choices that compromised his original values, but underneath the dangerous reputation lay someone who understood her idealistic frustration and possessed the means to address it. What kind of help? Riley whispered. Medical school tuition, Adrian said simply. Funding for a clinic that could serve patients regardless of their ability to pay. Resources to practice medicine the way you dreamed it could be practiced when you first decided to become a nurse. The offer hung between them like temptation wrapped in silk, beautiful and dangerous and far more appealing than Riley's rational mind wanted to admit. Here was everything she'd ever wanted, offered by a man who made her pulse race with desires that had nothing to do with career advancement and everything to do with the way he looked at her like she was precious beyond measure. What would you want in return? Riley asked, though her breathless voice suggested she already suspected the answer. You, Adrian said with devastating simplicity. Just you, Riley. Your trust, your companionship, your willingness to let me be part of whatever future you build with the resources I can provide. Before Riley could respond, the garden's peace was shattered by the sound of Adrian's phone buzzing with urgent insistence. His expression darkened as he read the message. Transformation from tender suitor to dangerous authority happening with frightening speed. I have to go, Adrian said, rising from the bench with fluid grace that belied his recent injury. But Riley, think about what I've offered. Think about the good we could do together. As Adrian moved toward the garden's exit, flanked by security personnel who'd appeared from nowhere, Riley felt as though she were watching her safe, predictable life disappear along with the most compelling man she'd ever encountered. Adrian, she called out, her voice carrying across the garden with desperate urgency. He turned back, hope and something darker flickering in his storm-gray eyes. If I said yes, Riley said quietly, what would that make me? Adrian's smile was gentle but honest, carrying truths Riley wasn't sure she was ready to hear. It would make you mine, Riley. Completely, irrevocably, dangerously mine. As he disappeared through the garden's entrance, Riley sat alone among the flowers, her heart racing with possibilities that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The choice between safety and passion had never felt more impossible or more urgent. Chapter 5. The Truth Unveiled. Adrian's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the Steele Tower, a monument to wealth and power that dominated the city skyline with architectural arrogance. Riley had expected luxury, but the reality exceeded her imagination. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing panoramic city views, museum-quality artwork adorning walls of imported marble, and furniture that probably cost more than her annual salary. Nevertheless, it was the details that truly revealed Adrian's world. Bulletproof glass discreetly integrated into the windows, security cameras hidden among the decorative elements, and the subtle modifications that transformed a luxury residence into a fortress disguised as a home. "Welcome to my world," Adrian said softly, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and something that might have been shame as he watched Riley take in the surroundings that defined his daily existence. Riley moved through the living space with the careful steps of someone navigating foreign territory, her nursing scrubs looking starkly out of place among the expensive elegance that surrounded them. She'd come here as Adrian's private nurse, officially discharged from the hospital but still requiring medical supervision during his recovery. Unofficially, she'd come because the choice between safety and Adrian Steele had stopped feeling like a choice at all. "It's beautiful," Riley said honestly, though her voice carried undertones of something that might have been sorrow. "And lonely. All this space, all this luxury, but no signs that anyone actually lives here." Adrian's smile was rueful as he recognized the accuracy of her observation. "Loneliness is a side effect of the life I've chosen. Beauty without companionship, luxury without love. It's a trade-off I accepted long ago." "Until now?" Riley asked, her heart racing as she recognized the implication in Adrian's words. "Until you," Adrian confirmed with quiet intensity, moving closer until Riley could feel the heat radiating from his powerful frame. "You've made me remember what I gave up when I decided that survival was more important than connection." Before Riley could respond to the devastating honesty in Adrian's admission, the penthouse's silence was shattered by the sound of Adrian's phone ringing with the kind of urgency that suggested business couldn't wait for personal moments. "Excuse me," Adrian said with obvious reluctance, his thumb tracing a gentle pattern across Riley's cheek before he moved toward his office. "This will just take a moment." Riley nodded, using Adrian's absence to explore the penthouse with growing curiosity about the man who lived surrounded by such careful isolation. Family photographs were notably absent, replaced by expensive art that suggested good taste but revealed nothing personal about its owner. The exception was Adrian's office, visible through French doors he'd left partially open, where Riley caught glimpses of a different side of his personality. The space was functional rather than purely aesthetic, with multiple computer monitors, filing cabinets that suggested extensive business operations, and walls covered with what appeared to be organizational charts of staggering complexity. Riley's nursing training had taught her to notice details others might miss, and what she noticed about Adrian's office made her blood run cold with growing understanding. Maps of the city marked with colored pins that suggested territorial divisions, photographs of men she recognized from newspaper crime stories, documents bearing letterheads she'd seen in federal investigation reports about organized crime families. Furthermore, Adrian's voice carried clearly through the partially open door. His tone transformed from the gentle warmth he used with her into something harder, more dangerous, completely unrecognizable as the wounded patient she'd been caring for. "The Chicago family thinks they can move product through our territory without permission," Adrian was saying, his voice carrying the kind of authority that brooked no argument. "Marco, I want you to remind them why that's a mistake. Use whatever methods necessary to ensure they understand the consequences of disrespecting Steele operations." Riley felt the world tilt sideways as understanding crashed over her like ice water. Steele operations, territorial disputes, methods necessary to ensure understanding. Adrian wasn't a technology consultant involved in aggressive business practices. He was Adrian Steele, head of one of the most powerful, organized crime families on the East Coast. "Make sure the message is clear," Adrian continued with chilling calm. "Anyone who challenges our authority will discover exactly why the Steele name commands respect in this city. I don't care if they beg. I don't care if they plead family connections. Send them back to Chicago in pieces if necessary." Riley's hand flew to her mouth as she processed the implications of what she was hearing. The man she'd been falling for, the patient she'd been caring for with such tender attention, was casually ordering violence with the same tone most people use to discuss grocery lists. Moreover, she was standing in the home of a man whose business involved exactly the kind of activities that brought gunshot victims to her emergency department on a nightly basis. "No, Vincent, I don't want them just roughed up," Adrian's voice continued with escalating menace. "I want them eliminated, permanently. The Kozlov family needs to understand that threatening my interests carries consequences that extend beyond simple business disagreements." Riley backed away from the office door on trembling legs, her mind racing through the implications of Adrian's true identity. Every gentle touch, every tender word, every moment of vulnerability she'd witnessed. All of it had been offered by a man whose livelihood depended on activities that destroyed lives and communities. The penthouse that had seemed lonely now felt sinister, its luxury built on foundations of violence and criminal enterprise. The artwork adorning the walls wasn't just expensive. It was probably purchased with money earned through activities that put people in her emergency department. "Riley?" Adrian's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts as he emerged from his office, his expression shifting from business authority to concerned tenderness with practiced ease. "You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," Riley lied automatically, though her voice carried tremors she couldn't suppress. "Just tired. It's been a long day." Adrian studied her face with the kind of intense observation that made Riley wonder what else he'd been hiding behind his carefully crafted patient persona. "Are you sure? You seem upset about something." "Actually," Riley said carefully, her nursing training helping her maintain professional composure even as her world crumbled around her, "I think I should go. You're recovering well, and you probably don't need constant medical supervision anymore." Adrian's expression darkened with something that might have been panic, though it was quickly replaced by the kind of calculated charm Riley was beginning to recognize as his default defensive mechanism. "Riley, stay," Adrian said softly, his hand reaching toward her with the same gentle reverence she'd come to associate with his touch. "We were just beginning to explore what this could become between us." "What this could become?" Riley repeated, backing toward the penthouse exit as understanding crystallized into cold certainty. "You mean what it could become between a nurse who saves lives and a man who destroys them?" Adrian went very still, his gray eyes sharpening with the kind of dangerous focus that confirmed Riley's worst fears about his true nature. "You heard my phone call," Adrian said quietly, and for the first time since Riley had met him, his voice carried genuine menace. "I heard enough," Riley replied with a strength she didn't feel. "I heard enough to know that everything you told me was a lie, and everything I felt for you was based on deception. Riley, let me explain." "Explain what?" Riley's voice rose with anger and heartbreak as she reached for the penthouse door. "Explain how you convinced me to care about you while you make a living doing exactly the things that destroy the patients I try to save." As Riley fled toward the elevator, Adrian's desperate voice followed her. "Riley, please, you don't understand the whole story." But Riley was already gone, leaving behind the most dangerous temptation she'd ever encountered and running toward the safety of a life that suddenly felt empty despite its moral clarity. Behind her, Adrian Steele stood alone in his penthouse fortress, watching the woman who'd become his salvation disappear along with any hope he'd harbored of redemption through love. The choice between safety and passion had been made, and both of them were about to discover that some decisions came with consequences that lasted far longer than the moments in which they were decided. Chapter 6. The Explanation. The sterile fluorescent lighting of St. Mary's Hospital had never felt more like a sanctuary as Riley threw herself back into the familiar rhythm of medical emergencies and routine procedures. 3 days had passed since her flight from Adrian's penthouse, 3 days of deliberately scheduled double shifts that kept her too exhausted to process the devastating realization that she'd fallen in love with a man whose livelihood depended on activities that contradicted everything she believed about healing and protecting human life. Nevertheless, exhaustion couldn't erase the memory of Adrian's gentle touch or the way his eyes had darkened with something that transcended mere physical attraction when he looked at her. Sleep, when it came, brought dreams of storm-gray eyes and the devastating realization that moral absolutes became considerably more complex when they confided with matters of the heart. "Nurse Parker," Dr. Morrison's voice cut through Riley's morning medication rounds with the kind of urgency that typically preceded either medical emergencies or administrative disasters. "You have a visitor in the consultation room. Says it's personal business." Riley's pulse quickened with unwelcome hope as she made her way toward the consultation room, her rational mind warring with the treacherous part of her heart that yearned for Adrian's presence despite everything she'd learned about his true nature. The consultation room was typically reserved for delivering difficult diagnoses to family members, its neutral decor and comfortable seating designed to soften the impact of life-changing news. Today, however, it contained something far more dangerous than medical revelations. Adrian sat in one of the consultation chairs with the kind of controlled stillness that suggested a predator temporarily at rest, his expensive suit immaculate despite the emotional turmoil that had defined the past 3 days. He looked every inch the successful businessman, but Riley's trained eye caught the subtle signs of strain, the slight tension around his eyes, the careful way he held his recently injured shoulder, the barely perceptible tremor in his hands that suggested withdrawal from something more profound than physical pain. "Riley?" Adrian said softly as she entered the room, his voice carrying the same gentle warmth that had originally drawn her to him despite every rational warning. "Thank you for seeing me." "I'm working," Riley replied with careful professionalism, though her treacherous pulse accelerated at the sight of him. "If you need medical attention, you should check in through normal channels." "I don't need medical attention," Adrian said with quiet intensity. "I need you to listen to an explanation you deserve to hear, even if you decide it doesn't change anything between us." Riley remained standing near the door, her body language radiating the kind of defensive tension that suggested flight was her preferred response to this confrontation. "There's nothing to explain, Adrian. You lied about who you are and what you do. Everything else is just details." "Details matter," Adrian replied with the kind of patient persistence that had probably served him well in business negotiations, legitimate or otherwise. "Especially when those details determine whether you see me as a monster or as someone who made impossible choices in impossible circumstances." Despite her better judgment, Riley found herself drawn by the pain underlying Adrian's carefully controlled words. "What kind of impossible choices?" Adrian's laugh held no humor, carrying instead the bitter weight of decisions that had shaped his life in ways he'd never intended. "The kind that start when you're 14 years old, and your father dies in a car accident that wasn't an accident, leaving you responsible for protecting a younger sister and a mother who doesn't understand that your family's legitimate businesses were built on foundations that were anything but legitimate." Riley felt her defensive posture softening slightly as she recognized the genuine anguish in Adrian's voice, the way his hands clenched into fists as he revisited memories that clearly caused him pain. "The Steele family controlled construction, shipping, and waste management throughout the Northeast," Adrian continued with brutal honesty. "Legal businesses, mostly, but with enough illegal components that rival families saw opportunity in my father's death. I had a choice. Let them destroy everything my grandfather and father had built, or learn to play their game well enough to protect what mattered most." "Your sister and mother," Riley said quietly, understanding beginning to dawn despite her resistance to sympathizing with criminal activity. "Sophie was 12, brilliant, dreaming of becoming a doctor. Adrian said with devastating tenderness. My mother was an art teacher who thought the worst thing that could happen to our family was a bad report card. Neither of them understood that refusing to cooperate with the Kozlov family would result in more than lost business opportunities. Riley sank into the chair across from Adrian as the implications of his explanation settled into her consciousness. They threatened your family. They killed my father, Adrian corrected with quiet fury that transformed his features into something harder, more dangerous. Sabotaged his car because he refused to allow drug trafficking through Steele shipping operations. They made it clear that Sophie and my mother would suffer similar accidents unless I proved more cooperative than my father had been. The consultation room fell silent except for the ambient sounds of hospital life filtering through the walls, monitors beeping, nurses walking past, the normal rhythm of medical care that suddenly felt disconnected from the larger world of moral complexity that Adrian was revealing. So you became what they wanted, Riley said, with growing understanding of the impossible position Adrian had been forced into as a teenager. I became what was necessary, Adrian replied with brutal self-awareness. I learned their rules, mastered their methods, and eventually exceeded their expectations to the point where the Steele family became powerful enough that no one could threaten the people I loved. And the violence, the territorial disputes, the methods you used to maintain that power? Adrian's expression grew distant as he contemplated questions that clearly haunted his quieter moments. I try to minimize casualties, but I won't pretend my hands are clean. I've made decisions that would horrify the man I thought I'd become when I was young enough to believe in moral absolutes. Riley studied Adrian's face as he spoke, searching for signs of justification or self-deception that would make it easier to dismiss his explanation as manipulative rationalization. Instead, she found genuine regret, self-awareness that suggested he understood the moral cost of his choices, and something that looked suspiciously like hope that she might be able to see past his crimes to the person he'd been before circumstances forced him to become someone else. What about now? Riley asked quietly. Your sister, your mother, are they still in danger? Sophie graduated from medical school last year, Adrian said with obvious pride that transformed his entire expression. She's doing her residency in pediatrics at Johns Hopkins, completely removed from anything connected to family business. My mother remarried a philosophy professor and lives in Vermont, where her biggest concern is whether her students appreciate modern art. So they're safe? Riley concluded. They're safe, Adrian confirmed. Which means, for the first time since I was 14 years old, I have choices about what kind of man I want to be moving forward. The implication hung in the air between them like a bridge. Riley wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. Adrian was suggesting that meeting her had somehow changed his priorities, that love might be powerful enough to motivate the kind of fundamental life changes that seemed impossible for someone so deeply embedded in criminal enterprise. What are you saying, Adrian? I'm saying that you've made me remember who I wanted to be before the world taught me that idealism was a luxury I couldn't afford. Adrian replied with quiet conviction. I'm saying that if you're willing to help me find a way out of this life, I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to become the man you deserve. Riley felt tears threatening as she processed the magnitude of what Adrian was offering. And if the people in your organization don't want to let you go? Adrian's smile was gentle but honest, carrying truths Riley suspected she didn't want to fully understand. Then we'll discover whether love is worth the kind of risks that most people never have to consider. Before Riley could respond to Adrian's devastating honesty, the consultation room door burst open with the kind of urgent force that preceded medical emergencies. Dr. Morrison stood in the doorway, his expression carrying the particular gravity reserved for life-or-death situations. Riley, we need you in Trauma Bay 3 immediately, Dr. Morrison said with professional urgency. Multiple gunshot victims, and one of them is asking for you specifically. Riley's blood turned to ice as she registered the implications of Dr. Morrison's words. Asking for me? By name? Says his name is Marcus, and that he needs to see Adrian Steele's nurse immediately. Dr. Morrison continued with growing concern. Riley, what have you gotten yourself involved in? As Riley looked into Adrian's eyes, she saw her own terror reflected in storm-gray depths that had suddenly gone hard with the kind of dangerous fury she'd only heard in his voice during that overheard phone call. They found us, Adrian said quietly, his hand moving to his jacket in a gesture that suggested he was armed despite being in a hospital. Riley, they found us, and now you're in danger because of me. The choice between safety and love had just been made for them, and Riley was about to discover that some risks were worth taking regardless of the consequences, especially when the alternative was losing the most important thing that had ever happened to her. Chapter 7. The Separation. The trauma bay at St. Mary's Hospital had witnessed countless scenes of violence and desperation, but nothing had prepared Riley for the sight of Marcus Chen, the kind doctor who'd encouraged her to stay in medicine, lying on a gurney with 3 gunshot wounds and blood loss that made his survival a matter of minutes rather than hours. Marcus, Riley breathed, her professional training overriding personal shock as she immediately began assessing his condition. What happened? Who did this to you? Marcus's eyes found hers with the desperate focus of someone fighting to deliver crucial information before consciousness slipped away entirely. They know about you and Adrian, Marcus whispered through lips that were already taking on the grayish tinge of severe blood loss. The Kozlov family. They're targeting everyone he cares about. Riley felt ice-cold terror settle in her chest as she processed the implications of Marcus's warning. How do they know about me? Hospital security cameras, Marcus managed, his breathing becoming increasingly labored despite the oxygen mask Dr. Morrison had placed over his face. They've been watching, waiting for Adrian to show vulnerability. You're his weakness now, Riley. You're how they'll destroy him. Adrian appeared in the trauma bay doorway like an avenging angel, his expensive suit incongruous among the medical equipment, but his presence immediately commanding attention from everyone in the room. The transformation from gentle patient to dangerous authority was complete. This was Adrian Steele in his element, radiating the kind of controlled menace that had built his criminal empire. How bad? Adrian asked Dr. Morrison, though his eyes remained fixed on Marcus with an expression that promised retribution for whoever was responsible. Critical, Dr. Morrison replied honestly. He's lost a lot of blood, and one of the bullets nicked his femoral artery. We're doing everything we can, but... Adrian's jaw tightened with fury that seemed to radiate heat throughout the trauma bay. Who did this? Kozlov soldiers, Marcus whispered, his hand reaching weakly toward Adrian. They wanted me to deliver a message. They know about Riley. They know you care about her. They're coming for everyone you love. Riley felt the world tilt sideways as understanding crashed over her like a tsunami. Her decision to care about Adrian hadn't just complicated her own life. It had put innocent people in mortal danger. Marcus was fighting for his life because criminals had identified Riley as Adrian's weakness and were willing to hurt anyone connected to her. Furthermore, she was standing in a hospital trauma bay, watching a good man die because she'd fallen in love with someone whose world operated according to rules that valued power over human life. Riley, Adrian's voice cut through her spiraling guilt with desperate gentleness. This isn't your fault. You didn't choose this. Didn't I? Riley replied with bitter honesty, her voice barely audible above the sounds of medical equipment fighting to keep Marcus alive. I knew what you were. I knew the kind of life you led. I chose to care about you anyway. And I chose to care about you, Adrian said fiercely, moving closer despite the chaos of medical activity surrounding Marcus's gurney. That doesn't make either of us responsible for the actions of people who profit from violence, but it makes us responsible for the consequences, Riley said quietly, her gaze shifting between Adrian's determined face and Marcus's increasingly critical condition. People are getting hurt because of what's between us, Adrian. Good people who don't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of your business disputes. Before Adrian could respond, Marcus's monitors began emitting the kind of urgent alarms that preceded either miraculous recovery or tragic loss. Dr. Morrison's team moved with practiced efficiency, but Riley could see in their faces the same resignation she'd learned to recognize during her years in emergency medicine. Time of death, 11:47 p.m., Dr. Morrison announced 20 minutes later, his voice carrying the weight of another life lost to circumstances beyond medical intervention. Riley stood frozen beside Marcus's now silent gurney, watching as orderlies covered the face of a man who'd been killed for the crime of showing kindness to Adrian Steele's nurse. The guilt was overwhelming, crushing, made worse by the knowledge that Marcus's death was just the beginning of the violence that would follow anyone who remained connected to her relationship with Adrian. "Riley," Adrian said softly, his hand reaching toward her with the same gentle reverence that had originally broken down her defenses. "We'll make them pay for this. I promise you. The people responsible will suffer consequences that—" "No," Riley interrupted with sudden clarity, backing away from Adrian's touch as if it were toxic. "More violence won't bring Marcus back. More death won't make this right." "Then what do you want me to do?" Adrian asked desperately, his controlled facade beginning to crack under the weight of watching Riley retreat from him. "How do I protect you from people who see caring about you as my greatest weakness?" Riley looked into Adrian's storm-gray eyes and saw her own heartbreak reflected in their depths, along with love that was genuine but ultimately destructive to everyone it touched. "You let me go," Riley said quietly. "You let me walk away before anyone else gets hurt because of what we feel for each other." "Riley, no." Adrian's voice broke on her name, the dangerous crime boss replaced by a man facing the loss of the only thing that had ever made him want to be better than his circumstances. "Don't let them win. Don't let fear destroy what we've built." "What we've built?" Riley's laugh held no humor, only bitter recognition of truths she'd been avoiding. "Adrian, what we've built is a fantasy. You're a criminal, I'm a nurse, and those two worlds don't coexist without innocent people dying." "I'll leave the life," Adrian said desperately, his hands reaching toward her with supplication that would have been unthinkable from a man of his power under any other circumstances. "I'll walk away from everything, start over, become someone worthy of you." "And how many people will die while you're transitioning out of organized crime?" Riley asked with devastating logic. "How many Marcus Chens will be killed by people who see your attempt to leave as betrayal or weakness?" Adrian had no answer, because they both knew that leaving his position as head of the Steele family wouldn't be as simple as submitting a resignation letter. Criminal organizations didn't typically offer retirement packages to leaders who wanted to pursue legitimate relationships. "I love you," Adrian said with quiet desperation, the words carrying weight that should have been enough to overcome any obstacle. "Riley, I love you more than I've ever loved anything or anyone. That has to count for something." Riley felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked at the man who'd become her whole world in the space of a few weeks. "It counts for everything, Adrian. That's why I have to leave before loving you destroys both of us." As Riley walked toward the trauma bay exit, Adrian's voice followed her with raw pain that nearly shattered her resolve. "Riley, please, don't let them take you away from me." But Riley was already gone, leaving behind the most dangerous love she'd ever known and walking toward a future that felt empty despite its moral clarity. Behind her, Adrian Steele stood alone among the medical equipment that had failed to save the life of another innocent victim, watching his salvation disappear along with any hope he'd harbored that love might be powerful enough to redeem a man who'd sold his soul to protect the people he cared about. The choice between safety and passion had been made, and both of them were about to discover that some decisions carved wounds that never fully healed, no matter how much time passed or how many other lives they built in the aftermath. Chapter 8. The Choice. 2 weeks had passed since Riley walked away from Adrian Steele and the most dangerous love she'd ever known. 2 weeks of deliberately returned to the routine that had defined her life before storm-gray eyes and gentle touches had made her believe in fairy tales that existed beyond the reach of moral compromise. The resignation letter she'd been updating for months now sat completed on her laptop, awaiting only her final decision about whether to submit it and leave medicine entirely. St. Mary's Hospital felt different now, tainted by memories of trauma bays where good men died for the crime of showing kindness to nurses who'd fallen for the wrong patients. Riley moved through her shifts with mechanical precision, her professional competence intact, but her emotional investment carefully locked away behind walls she'd rebuilt with desperate determination. Nevertheless, walls built on foundations of heartbreak proved remarkably vulnerable to unexpected assaults. Nurse Parker, Dr. Morrison's voice cut through Riley's morning medication rounds with the kind of urgent authority that typically preceded either medical emergencies or administrative crises. You have an incoming patient, priority 1 trauma, gunshot wounds, specifically requesting you as primary nurse. Riley's blood turned to ice as she processed the implications of Dr. Morrison's words. Requesting me by name? The patient is Adrian Steele, Dr. Morrison continued with obvious concern. Riley, I don't know what kind of relationship you have with this man, but his presence at this hospital puts everyone at risk. I should refuse to treat him. But you won't, Riley said with quiet certainty, knowing that Dr. Morrison's medical ethics wouldn't allow him to turn away a critically injured patient regardless of personal reservations. No, I won't, Dr. Morrison confirmed grimly. But I need to know, are you prepared to treat him professionally, or do I need to assign someone else as primary nurse? Riley's answer came without conscious thought. I'll take care of him. 20 minutes later, Riley stood beside the gurney where Adrian lay unconscious, his face pale with blood loss, and his powerful frame looking diminished by the machines keeping him stable. Multiple gunshot wounds decorated his chest and shoulder, suggesting a coordinated attack rather than random violence. Furthermore, the security detail that had accompanied Adrian to the hospital carried themselves with the grim efficiency of men expecting continued conflict rather than peaceful recovery. How bad? Riley asked Dr. Morrison, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest as she took in Adrian's condition. Critical but stable, Dr. Morrison replied honestly. 3 bullets, significant blood loss, possible internal bleeding. He's strong, and he was conscious when they brought him in, but the next few hours will determine whether he survives. Riley nodded, slipping seamlessly back into the professional persona that had sustained her through years of medical crises. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she checked Adrian's vitals, adjusted his IV line, and monitored the equipment that was fighting to keep the most dangerous man in the city alive. It wasn't until Adrian's eyes fluttered open that Riley's professional composure threatened to crumble entirely. Riley, Adrian whispered, his voice rough with pain and something that might have been relief. You came back. I never left, Riley replied with gentle honesty, her hand instinctively moving to cover his where it lay on the hospital blanket. I mean, I left you, but I never left here. This is where I work. Adrian's smile was weak but genuine, transforming his pain-etched features with the kind of joy that shouldn't have been possible given his critical condition. Lucky me. Adrian, what happened? Riley asked quietly, her nursing training warring with personal concern as she studied the placement of his wounds. Who did this? The Kozlov family, Adrian replied with bitter humor. Apparently, they decided that my emotional compromises made me weak enough to challenge directly. They were wrong, but not by much. Riley felt cold terror settle in her chest as she processed the implications of Adrian's explanation. They attacked you because of me, because they knew hurting you would hurt me. They attacked me because they're ambitious and stupid, Adrian corrected gently, his thumb tracing circles across Riley's knuckles where their hands remained joined. Riley, this was always going to happen eventually. My relationship with you just determined the timing. But if we hadn't fallen in love, I'd still be the same man living the same dangerous life, Adrian interrupted with quiet conviction. The only difference is that I wouldn't have had 2 weeks of believing I could be someone better. Riley stared into Adrian's eyes, seeing depths of pain that went far beyond physical injury. Here was a man who'd been shot multiple times, who was fighting for his life in a hospital bed, and his primary concern was reassuring her that their relationship hadn't been responsible for the violence that had nearly killed him. "Adrian," Riley whispered, "I'm so sorry. For leaving, for blaming you, for not understanding that love doesn't always come in packages that make moral sense." "Don't apologize for having principles," Adrian replied with devastating gentleness. "Don't apologize for being the kind of person who saves lives instead of destroying them. That's why I fell in love with you in the first place." Before Riley could respond to Adrian's words, his monitors began emitting urgent alarms that sent medical staff rushing toward his bedside. His blood pressure was dropping, his pulse becoming erratic, suggesting internal bleeding that hadn't been caught during initial treatment. "We need to get him to surgery immediately," Dr. Morrison announced with clinical urgency. "Riley, are you staying or going?" Riley looked down at Adrian, who was struggling to remain conscious as medical personnel prepared him for emergency surgery. His gray eyes found hers with desperate intensity, as if he were trying to memorize her face in case this was the last time he saw it. "I'm staying," Riley said with absolute certainty. "Adrian, I'm staying right here until you're out of surgery and strong enough to argue with me about whether we can make this work." "Promise?" Adrian whispered as they began wheeling him toward the operating room. "Promise," Riley confirmed, her voice carrying conviction that surprised her with its strength. As the OR doors closed behind Adrian's gurney, Riley sank into the waiting room chair where she would remain for the next 6 hours, her resignation letter forgotten in favor of the devastating realization that some love stories were worth fighting for regardless of how impossible they seemed. The choice between safety and passion had been made, and this time, Riley was choosing the man who'd made her remember why she'd become a nurse in the first place. To save lives, even when those lives belonged to people who'd lost their way in a world that didn't always reward goodness with happiness. Outside the hospital windows, dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of hope that felt like promises of better days ahead if they were both brave enough to reach for them. Chapter 9. The Threat. The recovery room at St. Mary's Hospital had been transformed into a fortress, Adrian's security detail creating a protective perimeter that made other patients nervous and hospital administration question policies about visitor restrictions. 4 days had passed since Adrian's emergency surgery, 4 days of touch-and-go recovery that had tested both his physical resilience and Riley's emotional endurance. Nevertheless, Adrian was healing with the kind of stubborn determination that had probably served him well in his criminal enterprises, and Riley had established a routine of caring for him between her regular nursing duties that felt both professional and intensely personal. "Your recovery is remarkable," Riley observed as she checked Adrian's surgical incisions, noting the healthy healing that suggested excellent physical condition and superior medical care. "Dr. Morrison says you should be able to go home in a few days." "Home?" Adrian repeated thoughtfully, his gray eyes studying Riley's face with the kind of intense focus that made her pulse quicken despite weeks of trying to maintain professional boundaries. "That's an interesting concept. I'm not sure I remember what home feels like anymore." "It feels like safety," Riley said softly, her hands lingering on Adrian's arm as she completed her medical assessment. "It feels like belonging somewhere with people who care about you for reasons that have nothing to do with what you can provide for them. Then I've never really had a home," Adrian admitted with vulnerability that transformed his dangerous reputation into something heartbreakingly human. "Until now. Until you." Riley felt her carefully maintained emotional distance crumbling under the weight of Adrian's honesty. "Adrian, we still haven't talked about what happens after you're discharged, about whether we can find a way to make this work without more people getting hurt." "We'll find a way," Adrian said with quiet conviction, his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. "Riley, I meant what I said about leaving the life, about becoming someone worthy of you." Before Riley could respond to Adrian's promise, the recovery room's peaceful atmosphere was shattered by commotion in the hallway outside, raised voices, rapid footsteps, and the kind of urgent activity that typically preceded either medical emergencies or security threats. "Mr. Steele," Marcus, one of Adrian's security personnel, burst through the door with the kind of urgency that made Adrian's expression immediately shift from tender patient to dangerous authority. "We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Adrian asked, already reaching for the clothes folded neatly in the bedside cabinet, despite Riley's medical objections to his mobility. "The Kozlov family has surrounded the hospital," Marcus replied grimly. 20 men, armed, positioned at every exit. They're not here for a social visit." Riley felt ice-cold terror flood her nervous system as she processed the implications of Marcus's report. "They're here for you." "They're here for both of us," Adrian corrected with the kind of deadly calm that suggested he'd been expecting this confrontation. "Riley, they know you're important to me, which makes you a target they can't afford to ignore." "I'm just a nurse," Riley protested weakly, though she understood the futility of the argument even as she spoke it. "You're the woman I love," Adrian replied with simple honesty that carried more weight than any criminal reputation. "In my world, that makes you the most dangerous weapon anyone could use against me." As if summoned by their conversation, Riley's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Adrian's expression darkened as he recognized the tactical significance of the timing. "Answer it," Adrian instructed quietly, "but put it on speaker." Riley accepted the call with trembling fingers, her voice barely steady as she spoke. "Hello?" "Nurse Parker?" came a voice that carried the kind of cold authority Riley had learned to associate with violence and intimidation. "My name is Victor Kozlov. I believe you know why I'm calling." "I don't know anything about your business with Adrian," Riley said with as much strength as she could muster. "But I know about your business with Adrian," Victor replied with silky menace. "And I know that he values your life more than his own empire. That makes you very useful to me." Adrian's jaw tightened with fury that transformed his features into something harder, more dangerous than Riley had ever seen. "Victor," Adrian said loudly enough for the phone to pick up his voice, "if you touch her, I'll spend whatever time I have left making you regret being born." "Adrian Steele." Victor's laugh was crystalline and cruel. "Still making threats from a hospital bed, how refreshing. But I'm afraid your threats carry less weight when you're wounded and surrounded." "What do you want?" Adrian asked with deadly quiet. "Simple," Victor replied with the confidence of someone holding all the advantages. "You transfer control of all Steele family operations to the Kozlov organization, effective immediately. In exchange, your lovely nurse lives to see another day." Riley felt the world tilt sideways as understanding crashed over her. She wasn't just caught in the crossfire of Adrian's criminal activities, she'd become the central bargaining chip in a power struggle that would determine control of organized crime throughout the region. "And if I refuse?" Adrian asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "Then Nurse Parker discovers exactly why the Kozlov family has controlled territory from Boston to Philadelphia for 3 generations. Victor said with chilling matter-of-factness. "You have 1 hour to decide, Adrian. Your empire or your woman. Choose wisely." As the call ended, silence fell over the recovery room like a shroud. Riley stared at Adrian, seeing her own terror reflected in storm-gray eyes that had suddenly gone hard with the kind of dangerous fury that had built his criminal empire. "Adrian," Riley whispered, "you can't give them what they want, your family's business, all those people who depend on you for protection." "None of that matters," Adrian interrupted with absolute conviction, his hand reaching for hers with desperate tenderness. "Riley, nothing matters except keeping you safe." "But—" "No," Adrian said fiercely, his voice carrying the weight of decisions that would reshape the criminal landscape of the entire eastern seaboard. "I'll give them everything, territory, operations, money, power, all of it, as long as you walk out of here alive." Riley felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she realized the magnitude of what Adrian was willing to sacrifice for her safety. "You'd give up everything you've built? Everything your father and grandfather created?" "I'd give up everything I've ever had for one more day with you." Adrian replied with devastating honesty. Riley, you've made me remember that some things are more important than power or territory or family legacy. What things? Adrian's smile was soft but determined, carrying promises that transcended the immediate crisis threatening to destroy them both. Love, Riley. Love is more important than everything else combined. As alarms began sounding throughout the hospital and security announcements crackled over the intercom system, Riley realized that the choice between safety and passion was no longer hers to make. Adrian had already decided that loving her was worth losing everything else, and now she would have to decide whether their love was worth the price he was willing to pay. Outside the recovery room windows, the city continued its daily rhythm, unaware that the future of organized crime was being determined by a wounded man's willingness to sacrifice an empire for the woman who'd taught him to believe in redemption through love. The most dangerous gamble of Adrian Steele's life was about to begin, and the stakes had never been higher. Chapter 10. The Rescue. The basement of St. Mary's Hospital had been designed for storage and utility access, its maze of corridors and mechanical rooms providing the perfect environment for the kind of confrontation that would never make it into official incident reports. Riley found herself in this subterranean labyrinth against her will, zip-tied to a surgical chair while Victor Kozlov and his associates waited for Adrian to arrive with the signed documents that would transfer control of the Steele family empire. Your boyfriend is taking his time, Victor observed, with the kind of casual cruelty that suggested he enjoyed psychological torture as much as physical intimidation. Perhaps he's reconsidering whether you're worth an entire criminal organization. Riley forced herself to meet Victor's cold gaze with as much defiance as she could muster, despite the terror clawing at her chest. Maybe he's just smart enough to know that giving you what you want won't guarantee my safety. Clever girl, Victor replied with false admiration. You're right, of course. Even after Adrian transfers his operations to me, you'll remain a liability. Someone who knows too much about family business, someone whose continued existence could motivate Adrian to reclaim what he's lost. The implication hung in the air like a death sentence, confirming Riley's worst fears about the ultimate outcome of Victor's plan. Adrian would sacrifice everything to save her life, and then Victor would kill her anyway to prevent future retaliation. Furthermore, Riley realized with crystalline clarity that her death would destroy Adrian more completely than losing his criminal empire ever could. He'll come for me, Riley said with quiet certainty, her voice carrying conviction despite her desperate circumstances. Adrian will come, and when he does, you'll discover why the Steele family has survived challenges from people like you for 3 generations. Victor's laugh was sharp and humorless. Adrian Steele is wounded, outnumbered, and emotionally compromised. He's coming to surrender, not to fight. Before Riley could respond, the basement's fluorescent lights cut out with mechanical finality, plunging the space into darkness that transformed familiar hospital corridors into something altogether more sinister. Emergency lighting kicked in seconds later, casting everything in hellish red illumination that made shadows dance with predatory intent. Positions! Victor commanded his men with professional efficiency, though Riley caught the note of uncertainty in his voice as he processed the tactical implications of losing primary lighting. The first gunshot echoed through the basement like thunder, followed immediately by shouts of alarm and the kind of chaos that preceded either victory or massacre. Riley strained against her restraints, trying to see through the maze of mechanical equipment and storage containers that blocked her view of the developing firefight. Adrian! Riley called out desperately, her voice carrying through the basement despite the ongoing violence. Here, came Adrian's voice from somewhere in the darkness, closer than Victor's men had expected, and carrying the kind of deadly calm that suggested he was very much in his element. I'm here, Riley. Just hold on. What followed was a masterclass in tactical warfare, waged in an environment that Adrian apparently knew better than his enemies. The sound of gunfire moved through the basement in patterns that suggested Adrian was systematically eliminating Victor's advantages while working his way toward Riley's location. Victor grabbed Riley's chair, pulling her deeper into the basement's maze, while barking orders to subordinates who were rapidly discovering that surrounding a wounded man didn't guarantee victory when that man possessed intimate knowledge of the battlefield and nothing left to lose. "Adrian Steele," Victor called out as he pressed a pistol against Riley's temple with desperate precision. "I have your woman. Surrender now or watch her die." "Let her go, Victor," Adrian's voice came from the darkness, impossibly close despite the labyrinthine layout of the basement. "This is between you and me. Riley has nothing to do with family business." "She has everything to do with it," Victor replied with vicious satisfaction. "She's your weakness, Adrian, your fatal flaw, and I'm going to use her to destroy everything you've ever—" Victor's words were cut off by the sound of his own scream as Adrian emerged from the shadows like an avenging angel, moving with fluid violence that transformed him from wounded patient to apex predator in the space of a heartbeat. What followed was brief, brutal, and utterly decisive. When the basement finally fell silent, Adrian knelt beside Riley's chair with hands that shook slightly as he cut through her restraints with desperate efficiency. "Are you hurt?" Adrian asked urgently, his hands moving over her with the kind of reverent care that suggested he was cataloging every detail to ensure she was truly safe. "I'm fine," Riley managed, though her voice trembled with reaction to everything she'd witnessed. "Adrian, you came for me. You risked everything to save me." "I told you," Adrian said softly, gathering her into his arms with gentle strength that belied the violence he'd just displayed. "I'd give up everything for one more day with you. My empire, my reputation, my life. None of it matters if you're not safe." Riley looked into Adrian's storm-gray eyes and saw depths of love that transcended every moral boundary she'd tried to maintain between them. "What happens now? To your organization? To the people who depend on you for protection?" "We'll figure it out," Adrian replied with quiet conviction. "Together. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As sirens wailed in the distance and hospital security began flooding the basement, Riley realized that the choice between safety and passion had finally been resolved in the most definitive way possible. Adrian had proven that his love for her was worth any sacrifice, any risk, any consequence that might follow. Now it was her turn to prove that some love stories were worth fighting for, regardless of how impossible they seemed or how much they challenged everything she'd once believed about right and wrong. "Adrian," Riley whispered against his chest as he held her in the aftermath of violence that had nearly destroyed them both. "I love you. Completely. Irrevocably. Despite everything that makes it impossible." "Nothing about loving you is impossible," Adrian replied with fierce conviction, his lips pressing against her temple with reverent tenderness. "Everything else is just details we'll figure out together." As they waited for medical personnel to assess their injuries and law enforcement to begin their investigation, Riley felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't experienced since her first day in nursing school. Absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the person she was meant to love. The burned-out nurse had found her purpose again, and the dangerous man who'd lost his way had found his redemption. Together, they would build something beautiful from the ashes of their separate broken lives. But first, they had to survive the consequences of choosing love over everything else that had once defined them. Chapter 11. The Healing. The private medical facility on the outskirts of the city existed in a world far removed from the chaos of St. Mary's Hospital, its luxurious appointments and cutting-edge equipment providing the kind of care that money could buy, when traditional healthcare systems proved inadequate for complicated circumstances. Riley had been unconscious for 18 hours following the basement confrontation, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion and trauma that adrenaline had temporarily masked. When she woke, the first thing she saw was Adrian. He sat beside her bed with the patient vigilance of someone who'd maintained a bedside vigil despite his own injuries, his left arm in a sling, and his face bearing the kinds of cuts and bruises that suggested he'd paid a physical price for their rescue. Nevertheless, his gray eyes blazed with relief and something deeper as he watched her return to consciousness. "How long?" Riley asked, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube that had been removed only hours earlier. 2 days, Adrian replied gently, his uninjured hand reaching toward her with the careful reverence of someone touching something precious. "You had a concussion, some internal bruising, nothing that won't heal completely with time and rest." Riley's memories of the basement confrontation came flooding back in fragments. Victor's threats, the gunfire, Adrian moving through darkness like an angel of vengeance, the overwhelming relief of being held in his arms when she'd thought she might never see him again. "Victor?" Riley asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Gone," Adrian said simply, his voice carrying the weight of decisions that had reshaped the criminal landscape of the entire eastern seaboard. Along with most of his organization, the ones who survived are facing federal charges that will ensure they spend the rest of their lives in prison. Riley studied Adrian's face, searching for signs of regret or satisfaction in his expression. What she found instead was exhaustion, relief, and something that looked suspiciously like peace. "And your organization? The Steele family business?" Adrian's smile was soft but determined, carrying promises that transcended their immediate circumstances. "Officially dissolved as of yesterday morning. All legitimate operations have been transferred to a foundation that will continue the legal aspects of my family's work: construction, shipping, waste management, but without any criminal components." Riley felt her breath catch as she processed the implications of Adrian's words. "You actually did it. You walked away from everything." "I walked toward something better," Adrian corrected with quiet conviction. "Riley, I've spent the past 2 days talking to federal prosecutors, providing testimony that will dismantle what's left of organized crime in the Northeast. In exchange, I've received immunity and the opportunity to rebuild my life as someone who creates value instead of controlling territory." "What about the people who depended on you for protection? The families who relied on Steele organization for their livelihoods?" "Taken care of," Adrian said with the kind of thorough planning that had made him successful in criminal enterprises and would apparently serve him equally well in legitimate endeavors. "Pension funds, job placement assistance, medical coverage for anyone who worked for my family. No one will suffer because I chose love over empire." Riley felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she realized the magnitude of what Adrian had accomplished while she'd been unconscious. "You really gave up everything for me." "I gave up everything that was keeping me from becoming the man you deserved," Adrian replied with devastating honesty. "Riley, loving you didn't just change my priorities. It reminded me who I was before circumstances forced me to become someone else." Before Riley could respond to Adrian's confession, the private room's door opened to admit Dr. Sarah Chen. No relation to Marcus, but carrying herself with the same competent authority that made Riley trust her immediately. "Mrs. Steele," Dr. Chen said with professional warmth, "it's good to see you awake. How are you feeling?" Riley's heart skipped as she processed the title Dr. Chen had used. "Mrs. Steele?" Adrian's expression grew uncertain, vulnerability flickering across features that had once commanded criminal empires with absolute authority. "I may have taken some liberties while you were unconscious. Legal liberties that can be easily reversed if you object to the presumption." "You married me while I was in a coma?" Riley asked with amazement rather than anger. "I married you because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you before I had the chance to make you my wife officially," Adrian explained with the kind of desperate honesty that made Riley's heart race with joy. "Riley, I know it's presumptuous, and I know you might want a real wedding with flowers and music and all the things you've probably dreamed about, but—" "Adrian," Riley interrupted softly, her hand covering his where it rested on the hospital blanket. "Are you asking me to stay married to you?" "I'm asking you to build a life with me," Adrian said with quiet intensity. "A real life, based on legitimate work and genuine love and the kind of future where we can help people instead of controlling them." "What kind of life?" Riley asked, though her heart was already singing with possibilities. Adrian's smile transformed his entire face, revealing depths of hope and determination that spoke of careful planning and genuine commitment to change. I've purchased land for a medical clinic in the downtown area, specifically designed to serve patients regardless of their ability to pay. The funding comes from liquidated assets of my former organization, and I'd like you to run it as head nurse while you complete your medical degree. Riley's breath caught as she processed Adrian's offer. Medical degree? Full scholarship to any program you choose, Adrian continued with growing excitement. Johns Hopkins, Harvard, anywhere you want to study. I know you've always dreamed of becoming a doctor, and I want to help you achieve that goal while building something meaningful together. And what will you do while I'm in medical school? Riley asked, though she was already falling in love with the future Adrian was describing. Learn, Adrian said simply. Learn how to be a legitimate businessman. Learn how to support communities instead of controlling them. Learn how to be the husband you deserve instead of the criminal I was forced to become. Riley stared into Adrian's storm-gray eyes and saw her entire future reflected in their depths, a future built on healing instead of harm, on love instead of fear, on the kind of partnership that transformed two broken people into something stronger than either could be alone. Yes, Riley said with absolute certainty. Yes to the clinic, yes to medical school, yes to building a life together, and yes to staying married to the most dangerous man I've ever loved. Adrian's kiss was soft, reverent, full of promises for their future and gratitude for their present. When they broke apart, both were smiling through tears of pure joy. One more thing, Adrian said with the kind of careful uncertainty that suggested he was saving the most important revelation for last. What? Riley asked, though she was already prepared to say yes to anything Adrian might propose. The clinic, Adrian said softly, his hand moving to rest against Riley's still flat stomach with reverent care. We might want to make sure it has an excellent pediatric wing. Riley's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Are you saying... I'm saying that loving you has given me more than I ever dared hope for, Adrian replied with wonder that transformed his dangerous reputation into something heartbreakingly tender, and apparently it's about to give us even more. As Riley processed the news that they were going to be parents, she realized that the burned-out nurse who'd hated her job had found not just love but purpose, family, and a future that exceeded every dream she'd ever dared to dream. The most dangerous love story she'd ever lived was about to become the most beautiful beginning she could imagine. Chapter 12. The New Beginning. 1 year later, the Emma Chen Memorial Medical Clinic stood as a testament to the power of love to transform tragedy into hope. Its state-of-the-art facilities and compassionate care serving patients from across the city, regardless of their ability to pay. The clinic's name honored Dr. Marcus Chen's memory, while its mission reflected Riley and Adrian's shared commitment to healing communities that had been broken by circumstances beyond their control. Riley stood in the clinic's main lobby, her medical degree diploma prominently displayed behind the reception desk alongside photographs of the clinic's first year of operation, images of successful surgeries, grateful families, and medical miracles that had been made possible by love that refused to accept the boundaries between right and wrong. Her white coat bore the title Dr. Adrian Steele, Director of Emergency Medicine, a designation that represented more than professional achievement. It symbolized the journey from burned-out nurse to confident physician, from moral absolutist to someone who understood that healing sometimes required working within systems that weren't perfect. "Mama," came a small voice from behind the reception desk, followed by the appearance of 6-month-old Emma Steele, named for both the clinic and the friend whose death had taught them that love was worth fighting for despite its complications. "There's my beautiful girl," Riley said, with the kind of joy that had transformed her entire existence, gathering her daughter into her arms with practiced ease. "Did you have a good morning with Papa?" "She had an excellent morning," Adrian replied, as he emerged from the clinic's administrative offices, his appearance as transformed as Riley's. The expensive suits remained, but they were paired with medical scrubs and a demeanor that radiated purpose rather than danger. though I think she's ready for lunch with her favorite doctor." Riley smiled as she watched Adrian approach, marveling at how completely he'd transformed from criminal mastermind to devoted husband and father. The past year had seen him complete business school, establish legitimate enterprises that employed former members of his organization, and prove that redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the necessary work. "Any interesting cases today?" Adrian asked as he settled beside Riley on the lobby's comfortable seating, his arm automatically coming around her shoulders in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. 3 successful surgeries, 2 babies delivered safely, and 1 former crime boss who insisted on personally reviewing the clinic's quarterly budget reports," Riley replied with gentle teasing that made Adrian's eyes sparkle with humor. "Someone has to ensure we're being fiscally responsible with our charitable donations," Adrian protested with mock seriousness. "Just because we're saving lives doesn't mean we can ignore sound business practices." "Spoken like a true reformed criminal," Riley said with affection that carried no judgment, only recognition of how far they'd both traveled from their original circumstances. As they sat together in the clinic that had become their shared purpose, Riley reflected on the journey that had brought them from that first night in the emergency department to this moment of perfect contentment. The road had been complicated, dangerous, marked by moral compromises and impossible choices that had tested every belief she'd once held about right and wrong. Nevertheless, it had led to this: a love that had transformed 2 broken people into healers, a family that proved redemption was possible regardless of past mistakes, and a future built on the understanding that the most powerful force in the universe was the willingness to choose love over fear. "Any regrets?" Adrian asked softly, the question he posed every few months when the weight of their complicated history seemed to settle between them. "Only one," Riley replied with the answer that had become their private joke. "I wish I'd been brave enough to fall in love with you sooner so we could have had more time to build this beautiful life together." "We have forever now," Adrian said, echoing the promise they'd made in a hospital basement while gunfire echoed around them. "And I intend to spend every day of that forever proving that love really can conquer everything, including the worst parts of ourselves." As they sat together in the clinic's peaceful lobby, their daughter sleeping contentedly in Riley's arms and their shared purpose surrounding them like a blessing, both Riley and Adrian knew they'd found something rare and precious, a love story that had survived impossible odds to become a testament to the transformative power of choosing each other over everything else the world offered. The burned-out nurse had found her calling, the dangerous man had found his redemption, and together they'd built something beautiful from the ashes of their separate broken lives. Their love story had begun with hatred for everything their individual circumstances represented, but it had evolved into the kind of epic romance that proved some risks were worth taking regardless of how impossible they seemed. The most dangerous love Riley had ever known had become the safest place she'd ever found, and the future stretched ahead bright with possibilities that exceeded every dream she'd ever dared to dream. Outside the clinic's windows, the city hummed with its daily rhythm of life and death, hope and despair, the eternal cycle of human experience that would always need people willing to heal rather than harm. And in the Emma Chen Memorial Medical Clinic, Dr. Adrian Steele and her reformed criminal husband continued their work of proving that love really could transform the world, one patient, one family, one impossible situation at a time.